modeling the energy consumption of buildings or the quantity and distribution of daylight that makes it through the building fabric. We've got quite a history in this country of analysing buildings in that way.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. You can also check out our Reimagined Buildings YouTube channel for some great inspiration for both building new or renovating. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast.
Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you, recording still from Adelaide, Australia.
Right, and I'm Zach Semke, coming to you from Seattle, Washington.
How's it going, Zach?
It's going well. The kids are out of school and enjoying the summer vacation. We have them pretty fully programmed, actually. So they're all busy with summer camps and stuff. But yeah, it's nice. A little bit different from your part of the world, I think, right now. Yeah,
a little cool. By the time this goes to air, we'll be back into, it'll still be winter. So I'm back into school, sort of having a mid-year break at the moment. But experiencing some fairly cool weather across this part of the world. So where I am today, as we're recording in Adelaide, Australia, whatever comes here tends to flow over the Tasman Sea and end up in Auckland at some point in time with a bit more dampness, usually picked up by the ocean. Things have been pretty wet and continue to be relatively cool, but it's okay. It could be worse. We're doing all right.
Yeah.
And this week I've got an interview. There's just so much in the Thrive conference, the Passive House conference in Sydney earlier this year. So I'm still catching up with some of the speakers who were at that event, and Dave Barker is one of those who did a joint presentation, which was very informative. Really enjoyed that, and so I reached out to David afterwards and dug into a little bit more about his background and also the work that he's been involved with recently. So looking forward to get into that. But before we do, we've got some people to thank.
We do. So everything we do at Passive House Accelerator, and then that includes the Passive House podcast, comes thanks to generous support from our sponsors. So a big thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingui Architects, Glavel, Minutair, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Thank you too to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Gradient, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, PH Air Seal, Proseco, and Source 2050. And a big thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
All right. Well, as I mentioned, David was presenting during the Thrive conference. It was a joint presentation, and David's work currently at Introba, where he's the managing principal, but he's also the national sustainability leader there. And they were talking about a playbook for Passive House, which was done for an organisation called Development Victoria. And this is very exciting because it's a public organisation that's responsible for quite a lot of infrastructure and buildings around the state of Victoria. So they have an organisation like that that's interested in Passive House, and then also promoting that work is potentially really, really powerful. So David was talking a little bit about that, which is what we go into. As David explained, he's had some experience working in the UK, originally from Australia, but got that experience from overseas, and now is coming back with some experience of Passive House, as well as working with some other tools, which we go into a little bit as well, which is always very interesting. So let's get into it. Here he is, Dave Barker from Introba, Australia.
So welcome to the Passive House podcast. Just give us a bit of an update on where you are. You're in Melbourne at the moment. How are things there?
I am. I'm in Melbourne. Melbourne's just coming out of, I think, the depths of winter. So it seems I might be jumping the gun a little bit because it's mid-July. But we're past the shortest day of the year, and at the least today looks quite bright and sunny. It's quite nice.
Nice. And you presented at Thrive at the Passive House conference, but also you're currently a board member.
I am, yeah, as of the start of this year.
Passive House Australia.
That's right. Yeah, so I was fortunate to present alongside Claire Parry at the Passive House conference at Thrive, which was fantastic. I was saying to a few people on the day that it just felt like a really tight-knit community of people interested in Passive House as a way of doing things, but also just people that are interested in health and well-being and good building performance and things like that. So it was a really nice couple of days up in Sydney. I joined the board at the start of this year with a really lovely cohort of people in the building industry, and it's been a good little ride so far.
So I want to go back to before we get into your presentation and your topic that you're heavily involved in now. Let's go back a bit, because you've been involved in sort of building performance, building physics. Or will you tell us what's been your journey before Passive House?
So the journey goes back. Have to decide how far to go back. I'll go back just as far to say that just before I went to university, I had a decision to make. Because I was either going to go to the I was either going to go back to the Conservatorium of Music in Sydney and pursue music as a career, or go into engineering school. And for one reason or another, I chose engineering and went into a mechanical engineering degree at the University of New South Wales. And like most mechanical engineering students, I thought I was going to get into Formula One and go and design McLarens and do that whole thing. And of course, you come out of uni and realize that the space for an automotive engineer in Australia just isn't quite there, unless you wanted to go overseas.
Known for their Formula One teams.
That's right. So I actually made a bit of a shift and moved into the kind of buildings space. And I joined Arup early in my career and focused in on building physics as my area of specialism. And I think that came off the back of an interest in physics and simulation and analytics, and really diving into the numbers and the data behind how we design good quality buildings and spaces for people.
Yeah. Which is interesting because, how would you describe building physics as a profession in this part of the world?
It's one of those things where the way that we design and deliver buildings in Australia creates a lot of space for people that are interested in analyzing buildings and analyzing the physics that kind of governs performance. So we have some really strong institutions like the Green Building Council of Australia, and if you look at the way that Green Star has influenced the way that we develop, it's had a huge impact, and that's always provided a foundation for people who are interested in building physics to get their hands dirty, I guess, in terms of modeling the energy consumption of buildings or the quantity and distribution of daylight that makes it through the building fabric, and those sorts of things. So we've got quite a history in this country of analysing buildings in that way. But of course, with anything, there's the kind of the high level or the simple way of looking at things, and then there's opportunities to dive in at greater depths and to greater levels of detail. And those are always the kind of spaces that interested me, diving in really deep and looking at the nuts and bolts of how things worked.
Yeah. And I mean, that's great from a mechanical engineer with an interest in building physics. Is there much of a market for it? Like, are people willing, or how much are people willing to pay for you to dive into those details?
I think one of the things I learned early on was that when it comes to people being willing to pay, it doesn't really matter all that much how excited I get about the thing. There's got to be a need or a desire or a want for these sorts of things. Someone once told me that the main question I had to answer was, so what? I mean, I was mucking around with things like augmented reality and virtual reality and doing all sorts of fun things like that back then. And this person said, well, you need to be able to answer the so what question. So if you can do all this analysis or analytics or modeling and simulation of a building, it has to be for a purpose. It has to be for a reason. And if you can communicate a so what proposition to your client or stakeholder or whoever it is that you're talking to, then that thing becomes much more compelling. And of course, then people might be willing to shed a few dollars to bring that expertise into a project.
Yeah, absolutely. So from Melbourne, you went off and spent some time in London. What took you over there?
What took me over there? Just a desire to work somewhere else, I think. My father is English, and a lot of his family still live over there. So from a personal standpoint, it was a good opportunity to go and spend some time with grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins that I hadn't spent all that much time with. And of course, the draws of traveling around Europe that would entice any Australian over to that side of the planet. So there was all that kind of stuff, and also just the idea that I could open my eyes to other ways of working in this space, and see a different take on how do we design and develop buildings for people.
Yeah. And following on from that, you mentioned Green Building Council of Australia. You've done a bit of time. You're on expert reference panel. Is that ongoing?
No, I've finished that role out. I actually started that in London, which was a bit strange because to join the calls, I was up at 2 a.m. sort of thing, and I remember sitting in our car in the garage because I didn't want to speak so loudly that my wife would wake up. So it was a bit of a feat to join these calls, but I was grateful to have been invited to join and really glad to be part of the development of Green Star buildings. So we were in that period where that new tool, which has been a step change, was being developed. So grateful to have spent some time with some clever folks pulling that together.
Yeah. By that stage, you'd spent time working as a consultant in the UK. Had you come across Passive House at that time?
I had, yeah. The business I work for, Introba, I actually joined them in London back in 2015, and we had just wrapped up a passive house school. It may or may not have been one of the UK's first. To do a bit of fact checking there, but so that was, to be honest, that was probably my first introduction to Passive House, because I hadn't really seen too much of it in Australia prior to moving to London, and yeah, it's just a little bit more noise in the Passive House scene over there. More people talking about it in general conversation, and as a way to peg building performance when you're in that design phase. Are we going to push for Passive House? Are we going to take Passive House principles, was something that was often talked about, into the design phase? How far are we going to go? And so it was a reference point that came up quite a lot when I was in London.
And had you trained as a consultant?
A Passive House consultant?
Yeah.
No. And so I'm actually not sure how many of the board are accredited, let's say, but I might be an anomaly, having been a building physicist and building performance enthusiast, but I never actually formally got my accreditation in the Passive House space, nor any of the other spaces. If I'm honest, I'm not really doing a great pitch for myself, but I'm not actually a Green Star accredited professional either. I've been fortunate to surround myself with those clever people that are accredited, and I've been lucky to work in teams where we have the ability to do that work with the right accreditations without me having to do them.
What about Well?
Well is something that again, London was probably the start of my Well journey. Again, not an accredited professional. I don't have that many letters after my name in my email signature. But again, lots of conversation around Well. I got to know that standard quite intimately in my time in London. It was, I was living through a period where that was again a really common reference point for design and deciding how we wanted to go about a particular building.
Yeah, and knowing what you know now, how do you feel that those relate to each other with your experience with Green Star, with Well, and also with Passive House? Is that confusing for the market, or are you able to sort of integrate all of them?
I can certainly see how it might be confusing for the market. I think it comes down to what is my role as a sustainability consultant. I think one of the biggest things I've learned over, I don't know, the last decade maybe, is the difference between being an expert and bringing your expertise to the table. So I try as often as I can now to show up in meetings with clients or design team meetings and things like that, with an open mind as to where we might go with things, but really trying to be a facilitator more than someone comes in with prior experience and says, this is what we did on project X, you should probably do it on project Y. So really helping our clients and stakeholders figure out exactly what it is that best suits their project, and figuring out what it is about any given project that resonates and that gives it purpose, and purpose beyond its own footprint, right? So what's its contribution going to be to the wider community or the wider system in which it's nested? And so in doing that sort of work, it's almost like you can start to forget a little bit about the fact that there's Passive House and that there's Well and that there's Green Star and that there's Lead and all sorts of other pursuits. They start to become an outcome of the direction setting exercise.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about the playbook that you did talk about with Claire. But before we do that, can you just give an overview? I'm hoping to get Claire back on the show as well. But it sounds like a tremendous opportunity to work with an organisation. Can you give us your perspective on who Development Victoria is? What role do they play, and what's their mandate?
Yeah, so good to get it from the horse's mouth. So do certainly get Claire back on, and she can speak for DV. But look, we've done a fair amount of work with Development Victoria, who are Victoria's, I guess, state development agency, government agency for development. And we've done all sorts of interesting projects with them, from community type development to residential, affordable housing, et cetera. And what's been really enjoyable working with them is that they have a really strong sustainability policy, I guess you could call it, that shapes the way that they approach development. And so the Passive House Playbook was really born through a project that they engaged us on, where they were interested in pushing the boundaries, understanding how Passive House might come about on a project of scale, a multi-family residential development. But importantly, how could it be done in a cost-effective, technically feasible way? As a government agency, there's a level of responsibility that they have in the kind of financial shape of what they develop and what they pursue. And so it was really important that this Passive House exercise wasn't just all right, let's do something business usual and see if we can tack on Passive House at the end, sort of thing.
Yeah. And how would you summarize the output of that exercise? What is the playbook, and what does it provide for people?
So the playbook is intended to be a general guide to how you might pursue a Passive House development. Again, in a technically feasible way and a cost-effective way. So it goes all the way from feasibility and setting the brief through to operations and how you might learn lessons and take those learnings to the next project, and also build capacity in the industry, in the market. So I think it's a set of 9 steps that we propose, and the idea really is that if we can get in as early as possible with our Passive House ambition or thinking, that really starts to pave the way for doing it cost effectively. And so there's numerous examples out there where Passive House overlaid on a business as usual approach may cost upwards of 20 to 30% more than the business as usual case, which makes it difficult to scale. And so, as part of this exercise with Development Victoria, we worked with a builder, which was built, and cost planners, et cetera, to work through the technical exercise, work through the costing, and we got to around about 2 to 3% cost uplift on the basis of kind of applying the playbook all the way through from brief setting, making sure that the right team was involved, all the way through to delivery.
And that's based on standard-ish Australian processes and products and materials.
Yeah, that's right. The
things that are commonly available.
The disclaimer there, of course, is that this is a point in time costing exercise. It's Australian supply chain. It's a particular building that we used as a pilot for this exercise. But yes, it was intended to be something that was achievable and technically and achievable within a reasonable budget uplift.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's a fairly common theme for this conferences and conferences that I've been to previously, that the earlier a passive house consultant gets onto the project, the better the outcome is likely to be from a design, but also from a cost point of view. Is that one of the key recommendations of bringing that cost down?
Yeah, definitely. One of the recommendations we make is that it's not the team shouldn't be designed in a way that the responsibility falls on one person's shoulders or one consultant's shoulders. The idea is that if you're conscious that you're intentional about designing and building a passive house, make sure it's in the brief really clearly, so that when you're going out and engaging your architect, when you're engaging your building services consultant, when you're engaging your builder, and ideally doing an ECI phase or getting your builder in early to make sure you've got that buildability advice right up front. Because it's embedded in the brief and everyone's aligned in that ambition, you're much more likely to end up with a team that's in sync, I guess, is a way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the other concepts that you talked about was promoting the potential rather than the problems, which I guess is a key element to getting the whole team on board, or any people that might be putting resistance on the project and identifying all the problems, but changing that focus to looking at the potential, so the positives, the outcomes of the project. Can you talk a bit about not just the technical details, but that sort of getting people on board?
Yeah. We actually used that idea of problem versus potential is a mindset that we actually brought to the table when we were developing the playbook. So when we were workshopping all these ideas with Development Victoria and a number of kind of multidisciplinary consultants and a builder, we said from the outset that we wanted people to think from a mindset of potential rather than problem. And the reason we did that is when people focus on a new idea or doing something that's not business as usual, it's quite natural to focus on the problems. It's really natural to gravitate towards, well, this is the big thing, this is the big roadblock that's going to get in the way of this new thing. And in our experience, if you're in a mindset of thinking about problems, you end up playing whack-a-mole. you end up focusing in on problem A and trying to resolve that. And meanwhile, problem B is resurfacing because of something that you're doing for problem A. And that whole whack-a-mole situation just isn't conducive to doing non-business as usual things. And so we've been doing a lot of work in the regenerative practice space. Really thinking about how good projects can be, how much good they can have in the systems that they're nested within. And part of that regenerative practice is really about the way that we think about what we do. So we encouraged people that were developing the playbook with us to think about potential. So what is the ideal scenario? How do we imagine the ideal scenario of working on a passive house project from start to finish? And that's how we defined the 9 steps. The 9 steps that we defined in the playbook were really just a summary of the potential that the team saw in delivering a passive house project. And then it was a case of mapping that against where we are now in terms of traditional procurement and design, and starting to think about how do we bridge the gap between where we are now and where we think we need to get to.
Yeah. And in terms of real life success, what's been done so far? You and Claire talked about a couple of projects. So are there some real life examples now that have used the playbook?
I'm probably not the one to speak to it, but the pilot project that we were using as a basis for this thinking with Development Victoria is moving forward. As I understand it, it is heading in the direction of delivering a passive house outcome, but certainly want to circle the wagons with Claire. Ultimately, the simple answer to your question is, I'm still trying to get the Passive House Playbook out. So I promised it to people back in May at the Thrive conference, and we're just putting the final touches on it at the moment. So I've told a few people. There's been a remarkable number of people that have reached out and said, "Hey, when's it coming out? I'd love a copy." I've said to a few people July, so end of July. I'm intending to get it out, and then hopefully we can see if it can shape some thinking. I guess it's not going to be everything to everyone, but I'd love to see if people in the industry can take something away from it and apply it to their projects. I mean, I feel like if we can get some people just taking the first couple of steps, really thinking clearly about setting their brief and engaging the right team, that's a win. That's a positive outcome for getting this thing out there.
Sure. What's your vision for the construction industry in Australia, particularly with regards to Passive House? Where would you like to see things in the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
For me, it's really about scale. I think there's a really nice undercurrent of single-family homes that are taking the steps towards passive house, being certified, or even just thinking about it. It's much more in the public discourse now than I think it was a little while ago. But for me, and part of the reason I wanted to join the board of the Australian Passivhaus Association was to influence how we scale passive house across the industry. So whether that be multi-unit residential buildings, whether that's institutional buildings, community buildings, I think there's a huge opportunity to scale up the the implementation of Passive House in our industry, with a whole range of benefits.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, and I think, I mean, I can understand why people are so interested in this, because I think, having a playbook or some general guidance to accelerate that uptake and also to promote those potential benefits and look at the possibilities, I think is a really useful step forward to bring Passive House out of something that's tiny and fringe into more of the mainstream. And also, I mean, I've talked about this a lot. I'm really excited to see an Australian, New Zealand kind of vernacular of buildings that are responding appropriately to our climate with Passive House performance outcomes, which I think this type of initiative helps us to do as we sort of go into this a new generation, if you like, of architects coming in and designing with the best ideas, the best building physics from around the world, but with an Australian and New Zealand context. I think is really exciting. So thank you for your work, David, and also for your time and energy on this project. And we look forward to seeing where things go.
Thanks, Matthew. It's been really fun, and it's been a pleasure to talk through it with you.
And that was Dave Barker, who's the National Sustainability Leader at Introba Australia. What do you think, Zach?
Well, I just want to start with, he was very self-deprecating about the letters behind his name. And I think that we can all recognize that that's kind of a technicality, I think, for him. Like he's clearly brings some formidable expertise in building physics and engineering to the work he does. So, but also clearly has a great team that he can work with on to dot some of the I's and cross some of the T's in certification. It was a really fun conversation, and I'm eager to see the playbook when it gets published, which should be any time now.
Yeah, definitely. So keep an eye out. Also, do check out Development Victoria. They've got a lot of interesting resources and information about their projects. I was fumbling around a little bit at the intro, but Development Victoria, it was only established in 2017 and operates under the Development Victoria Act of 2003, and it has some functions. The primary functions of the Act are carrying out property development and social and economic capital works projects in accordance with government policies and strategies, providing advisory services and developing declared projects. So, and they are responsible to some of the ministers in that government. So, they're a government organisation, and that is, any time that Passive House gets a mention or gets some traction within a government organisation is really super exciting, because it's a way to legitimise and see Passive House as a solution in that context. And with those goals and those objectives of an organisation like that, the benefits, the downstream impacts of projects that they've been working on is potentially significant. I also want to do a shout out to Claire Parry, who is now with Development Victoria, and also is equally humble in her work. And I think we can credit a lot of the work behind the scenes, but also some of the successes of Passive House in Australia to Claire. She'll be familiar to many people involved in Passive House scene, and she's been a very active player in Passive House and getting Passive House up and running in Australia. Been involved with the board over a number of years, and now is doing this great work with a government organisation. So Claire actually co-presented with David during the Thrive conference, and it was a great story that they told.
This theme also of demonstrating kind of the cost effectiveness of Passive House and making the case for that is, I think, a really important one. It was actually just being discussed a couple of days ago at our Passive House Accelerator live episode, and we had somebody on the call from Iran, and he was talking about his challenges about introducing Passive House there, and the perception that Passive House is really expensive, like 20 to 30% more expensive than conventional construction. So when I heard that those figures again, I was reminded about how that can be a real hurdle for, especially in the early stages of adoption of Passive House, before there have been teams that have demonstrated that they can bring the cost down. So the fact that you have this public entity that is going to have or has a different kind of level of credibility than maybe a private practitioner would, who's advocating for something that they believe in, right? Showing why the costs can go down to more like 2 to 3%, I think can be really powerful. So that's, I don't think we can kind of overstate the impact that could have on speeding up adoption at this early stage.
Yeah. Something that stood out, I'm just looking through David's profile. The reason I brought up the other tools was that he has done a lot of work with things like Well and Living Building Institute, and also been part of a expert reference panel for greenhouse gas emissions on the Green Building Council of Australia. So again, great links with those other organisations and really helping to put Passive House into context of those other rating tools and other sustainability measures. I guess one of the things that jumps out at me first and foremost is David's background as an engineer. Getting stuck into the real sort of mechanical nuts and bolts of mechanical engineering early on, but always seeking out sustainability and energy efficiency and landing at some point on Passive House. And then, like you say, ending up doing some of that or working alongside some of that financial analysis. And I think part of the reason why we do the financial analysis is to make the case. And, we see this quite often in Passive House projects where people start out from a very technical place, from like an engineer or possibly an architect, but it often comes back to selling the idea and interacting with people and making a business case or an emotional case for better buildings, which is clearly where David, along with Claire, have found themselves now in advocating for better buildings.
The whole mindset thing behind the playbook, and I mean, I was just reflecting on what your comments just now. I think there's also something there about the mindset of these pioneers of Passive House, right? And that looking at the potential, focusing on the potential rather than the problem. And I think that it's a kind of broader also challenge and important kind of internal work that I feel like I'm needing to do. And I think that probably a lot of people who are involved in this work of climate action need to do. And that's cultivating that sense of potential, that sense of possibility, and this notion that this distinction between hope being an emotion or hope being a virtue that needs to be cultivated and fed and made real, I guess, by action. So there's this, I think the mindset piece is so key for all of us in this movement.
I mean, I really like that idea of thinking about potential rather than problems, and it's very easy to say. I think some of these projects are full of really good examples, though, practical examples of where that is in play in the real world. And thinking back, that financial analysis is one example where it's so often seen as a barrier or a problem. But if you spin that around and just think about the bigger picture, you can present that as the potential of hey, look, this big investment that you're doing anyway. All that's, you're going to spend that money regardless of any type of building. That's just the cost of doing a building. So the potential there is, given that investment that's going to happen anyway, why would you not spend a very small amount extra to make it a super healthy, energy efficient building that's going to be resilient, rather than just a stock standard building that it's going to have high operating costs. People aren't going to love it. It's going to have all these other issues down the track.
Yeah, I think that.
There's potential other loads and loads of other examples when you think about mechanical system scaling down, that you don't need this massive plant, and all the other benefits that you get. It's definitely a nice framework to think of.
Yeah, and that resilient piece too, I think that you mentioned is, I think, in terms of like flipping things a little bit, if we start focusing on resilience more than we focus on energy conservation, I mean, in terms of as top of mind concerns, I guess, for homeowners and building owners, that also, I think, changes the financial conversation too. Because I think when we talk about, I think it's valid and important to be thinking about energy conservation, but that can sometimes go to purely dollars and cents about what is the payback period for this investment, and in terms of my utility bill savings. All of that is, that those are real savings over time. Sometimes it takes a long time. There's the issues of the split incentives and all that. But when it comes to like, am I going to be safe in my house, and will I be able to deal with these bushfires or the wildfire smoke, or when the grid goes down because of some extreme weather event? All these measures that we're talking about with making this a more robust building and building envelope means that will be, it increases passive survivability and all that. So, and I think that, we're going, a lot of North Americans are going through a lot of crazy weather right now, with a heat dome that it's reaching from coast to coast almost across the South, and ridiculous flooding that it was like off the charts in Maine, and the temperatures off in Florida of the seawater. The ocean water in Florida are in 90 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, it's just like things are, because of this worsening climate change plus El Nino, things are just really have taken a kind of a step jump for us in terms of awareness right now, because we're in the middle of the summer also. And I think that makes this that changes. I think it's going to be changing the way that all of us think about shelter.
Well, even calling it shelter, I think, helps put it in context. It's just not just a building to show off, a design, but it does have an important function, an important role to play, which is providing shelter from the elements throughout the whole year, and those elements are changing. Right. So I think that and I agree. I think people's awareness is going to come more and more potentially. That's because there's an emotional response to that. We could even find that starts to impact design faster than building code. We sort of look to building codes to change things to be more energy efficient, but we may start finding just people's discomfort and the more extreme events that start to have an impact on people's design decisions, regardless of the actual rules and regulations that are in place.
Yeah. Right. And then, so I guess the other thing that then raises is the privilege, right? Like, and,
True.
like in that conversation with this gentleman from Iran, the resource, like the response that he's getting from folks at his university is like, oh, that's just like something for the wealthy countries,
Yeah.
So it's how do we then bring this level of shelter and resilience to some of the places in the world that are going to be impacted, the most severely by the changes that we're seeing now.
Yeah. And coming back to Development Victoria, as I pointed out, that's why it's really exciting for the work that Claire Parry there has done, bringing Passive House to the forefront in a government organisation who has as one of their objectives to provide advice and also to showcase best practice and including the affordability of that. So, it's a great shift towards more equality rather than just having Passive House as standalone, bespoke designs, beautiful architectural homes for those that can afford it, but really thinking about, what's available there for a much wider audience and different building types, but also people in need of shelter. Watch this space. We'll keep an eye out, and we'll put some links to Development Victoria as well. So you keep an eye out for that playbook, but also watch this space for some of the projects they're working on as well. So well done to Dave Barker, also to Claire Parry and others that are involved in that space as well. It's really exciting to see.
Definitely.
All right, we've got an event coming up this week.
We do. So this is our last live event for a few weeks. We're taking August off for Passive House Accelerator Live, and we'll be back in September. But the podcast will continue during August. Anyway, this week we are joined by Oliver Style. Oliver has been on the program before. Really exciting practitioner. He's with Praxis Resilient Buildings in Spain, and he's going to be presenting Passive House for elderly residents in warm climates, meeting unique technical challenges. So right back to the shelter for everybody theme. So that'll be on July 26th, Wednesday here. So that means Thursday, July 27th for you, Matthew.
Yep. Awesome. All right. Well, as you said, we will be taking a break from live, but we'll still be podcasting. So we look forward to bringing out some more episodes for what you listen to, and we'll be back again next week. Thank you, and we'll see you then.